the NAACP after the 1970s because they're super struggling as an organization. They're being sued by a lot of the racists that they sued in the 50s and 60s. They're losing membership. They're losing kind of appeal to youth because of the growth of Black power and the disillusionment with civil rights organizations. And so they come up with a strategy called Fair Share that comes out of the Los Angeles branch. And that's the idea of selective boycott. They do it at Coors because Adolf Coors, says bananas things like, slavery wasn't that bad. It was kind of a good idea. And, all of these companies that are doing what companies do, they're targeting them, and their terms of negotiations open up the pathway for Black people in white collar and elite positions. For the most part, it enhances the deposits in white banks. It creates all sorts of contracts for Black insurance agencies and advertising agencies, but it never gets to the heart of the critical mass of workers in any of these industries.
It also feels to me that if I'm owning a franchise in really in any area to a certain extent, it's possible that my intentions are, I want to raise the wages of the within the community, but it seems to me that from a business standpoint, I'm not. It's not rocket science to take a bun and put it on here, and I don't want the wages to go up too much in this community. That it is actually not in my best interest for more businesses to be built around my McDonald's or whatever it is, because if there are more businesses here, then I'm going to have more competition for my labor. And so there's a everybody's got to eat. And so, I'm not, they're going to spend their money on their electric bill or their gas bill, and then they're going to buy food and maybe clothes, but I don't need a lot of business to be going on here for me to make my money when I'm in the business of selling low-cost food.
Well, talk about all sorts of kind of perverse motivations, because on one hand, archetypically, the Black business owner has been the anchor of Black communities, since the 19th century. It was the guy who owned the funeral home, the family that owned the bank, when they were, when they were servicing Black consumers who had zero options, right? And then they were doing other things like lending money or establishing scholarships. This has not changed that much. But one of the things that I think is fascinating, after the George Floyd summer, all of these ridiculous calls for more Black businesses, I was so grumpy because I couldn't believe all of the bad ideas of the past were being recycled for this moment, in which I think that there's incredible clarity in movements, like abolish and defund, like Black Lives Matter, about what the terms of engagement are. But the response becomes more Black creators on Etsy, or more Black furniture makers, or 5% of contracts for this clothing company will come from Black designers. That's great. This does nothing to actually address any of the things that people are asking for or demanding or dying for. But this idea that the Black business can then do these things is also such a setup for failure. The majority of Black businesses in the United States do not employ anyone, are these kind of sole proprietor, one person, maybe one family setups. This idea that you're going to open all of these businesses and they'll be in the position to pay the living wage, to have really robust benefits, to, invest in the community, it's not real. And this is where I start to think about, these franchise owners. Some of them made a lot of money, but, there was a recent lawsuit among 50 plus Black franchise owners against McDonald's. They're alleging the things that I write about in my book from the 70s, that there's this disparate way in which they have to operate. And the weight of doing businesses in the particular communities that they're often put in is also something that is kind of, not sustainable for their businesses. So if it's happening with a McDonald's franchise, how the hell is a Black-owned boutique or bookstore going to carry the weight of complete, structural racism as well as government negligence?
Well, can you talk a little bit about how those Black franchise owners are, what the nature of the lawsuits are, and what the dynamics are that put them under the gun? Which, of course,
I mean, come on.
Well, yes, but I mean, but be explicit about that for us. But also, we should also say that to the extent that there's any of those people who do have designs on building up their community, that kind of pressure also decreases the opportunity for them to do that, even if we're not so jaundiced about their intentions to do so.
Absolutely. So what they allege is that McDonald's has been engaging in a practice in which when a Black franchise owner is to be assigned a store, they are assigned stores in predominantly Black areas that have a low economic base. And as a result, the carrying costs of doing business in those communities are unusually higher relative to their white peers who are often assigned in places in the suburbs and predominantly white areas. And one of the things that the franchise owners from the 70s would talk about is to say that we make more money than the white stores, but our carrying costs are higher because of security, usually taxes because they're in major urban areas, as well as the fact that Black franchise owners often inherited stores that were in poor condition and had a lot of broken equipment. McDonald's is also, it's not only a real estate company, it's also, an object lesson in supply chain. So if I franchise a McDonald's and you have a tomato farm and we're friends and I say, hey, can you give me a deal on tomatoes? I can't do that, right? There's certain suppliers and there's certain mechanisms, and there's also certain demands that a franchise owner has to meet. And so when things that are supposed to make fast food attractive are introduced, all-day breakfast, unlimited soda, Wi-Fi, touchscreens, the McCafe, all of those types of upgrades are the responsibility of the franchisee in order to be competitive and compliant. And Black franchisees will say, we can't do those things and still make money, or we can't do those things and still keep up with our rent payments. And so what they are saying is a lot of the things that we see in the real estate market, that there's redlining, that there is assignment and steering into certain communities. And as a result, that Black franchise owners are more vulnerable to losing their stores.
Where are we today on these kind of debates or questions? I mean, it sort of feels like we're not necessarily in a great place.
No, we are not. And, this is where I start wagging my finger at everyone. Folks, businesses, I guess, are fine. I guess someone can sell something and people can buy things in markets. I've already, excuse me, I've already given up the fact that I'm not going to win this fight against capitalism by saying that maybe we don't need markets. Okay, fine, we have markets. But markets should not be tied to the well-being and the viability of people. And so, we are still in the age of bad ideas. We're still in the age of Black-owned businesses are something that we put resources in, or the illusion of resources in, at the detriment or the expense of thinking about the fact that we actually have a robust public system to draw funds from, and we can provide people with the things that they need. Sometimes when I'm on the road with my book, someone will say, well, what do you think the solution is? And I'll say, I can answer all of these questions, right? Like, what do we do about racial injustice? This is where we start. Free college, Medicare for all, free childcare. Let's start there. These aren't even like the most radical of ideas. Let's start there. No one has to take diversity training. No one has to be more sensitive. I'm not going to even ask you to be less racist. I'm just going to ask for things that are not tied to employment, and also things that everyone can get so they can make decisions free and clear. Because one of the great dangers of thinking we can kind of start up or innovate our way out of racial injustice is that it's not only untrue, but then it makes people even more vulnerable to the whims of people who say, here's this shiny object. This is what is going to answer our questions. And it's a great strategy because it never forces us to say, wait a second, don't we have a robust public system in which these things can actually happen? So, the sleight of hand continues. I think the grift continues. And we are, unfortunately, in this moment, both with the George Floyd summer and COVID-19, where I think the floodgates and the disaster capitalism, we already see it manifesting.
Indeed. Marcia Chatelain, the professor of history, African-American studies at Georgetown, author. The book is Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.